topic of this talk is on an expression. That expression is whatever it takes. Now, it's a bit of a difficult subject for me to talk about, and a little bit reluctant to have to be in a position where I am going to talk about this subject. Now, I've been around in this business, in this thing of ours, for over 40 years now. There's very little I haven't seen. Most things I've seen happen repeatedly, again and again. So there's nothing new for me to see or experience in this movement. I'm going to take you back for the moment, back to the mid-90s, when there was an organisation called C18, Combat 18 around, and they used this expression, whatever it takes. The implication being that they would do whatever it takes to get to power, to win, to save our country and our people from destruction. They would do whatever it takes. But the thing, whatever it takes, always implied something very drastic, something harsh, something violent probably, something extreme. Whatever it takes was never anything sensible or moderate. They were always out of bounds. They were never whatever it takes. Even if they're going to be successful, whatever it takes always meant something at the extremes, at the beyond the pale, something beyond the pale. I wrote about this back at the time in a magazine called Patriot, and I'll quickly quote you a few passages I wrote. This Patriot magazine actually led to the relaunching of the BNP effectively, when it moderated somewhat and gained popular support as a result of the articles which were written in this magazine. Anyway, back in '97 this is, remember. So I said, to engage with the people, you must first speak their language and address their concerns. Fidel Castro campaigned amongst the Cuban peasants over land reform. He didn't prance about attempting to look strong while regurgitating great swathes of Leninist dogma. It was the same with the Viet Cong, but some British nationalists are tied to outdated foreign dogmas that come before all else. We must create a mass base by any means necessary, even if it means giving up some of the trappings that some hold so close to their hearts. I've said that British nationalism must be thoroughly British, yet some persist in cloaking themselves in the trappings of Nazi Germany. There are many so-called British nationalists who can name every SS division, yet don't know the names of any of Wellington's generals at Waterloo. If our impressionable young activists run around with half-baked Nazi propaganda in their heads, then they are hardly the best suited people to talk with and empathise with the problems of Joe Public on his doorstep. The real sellouts are those who cling to their pure dogmas, which have no prospect of ever gaining popular support. You have to question the motivation of such people. Are they really interested in success, or are they more concerned with acting out their autoerotic fantasies? Whatever it takes. The truth is that whatever it takes is being sensible, being responsible, and not running around like excitable idiots. Is it too much to ask that nationalists do whatever it takes to get to power, even if it means they have to pack away some of their long cherished notions? To engage with the community, you have to get involved in real politics. Real politics means you have to be pragmatic and talk about the real issues in order to get to your objective. British nationalism has at times successfully divorced itself from reality in words and behaviour. The cranky and shrill language can only repel normal people whose lives are not dominated by conspiracy theories and sinister Jewish plots. Unless nationalism applies itself to the modernist approach, frustrated individuals will continue to go off and do foolish things which will land them in jail. As I said, that was in 97. if I can find it, yes, in this other subsequent issue of the same magazine, I also said, because it involved a thing called minimalism, which I called minimalism, which is where you strip off all the excess baggage. It comes from a conflict within Italian communism, actually, many years ago, between the minimalists and the maximalists. The maximalists wanted to stick rigidly to dogma. Minimalists were the ones who were more successful, were more pragmatic. Anyway, I said this: minimalism entails adopting the line of least resistance that is still consistent with core ideology. Core ideology for us is effectively preserving our people from destruction, and our country and our civilization from destruction. It means that all excess baggage is discarded. It is the opposite of maximalism, which involves rigidly sticking to your guns and never compromising on any position. So that is the argument between minimalism and maximalism, between pragmatism and success, and rigid dogma and failure. And we have to do whatever it takes to win. And the answer is clear there, what approach we have to adopt. As I said, it's a repeating heresy, this Nazism thing. Mosley was the first one to make the error back in the 30s, before the war. After the war, you had John Tyndall, who later became the leader of the BNP, never lived down his flirtation with overt Nazism back in the early 60s. Moved forward a bit, you had an idiotic group around the 1980 called Column 88. It's one of those code things, so the 88 means Heil Hitler, the 8th letter of the alphabet being H. And then move forward, I've mentioned Combat 18. That again is the same sort of code. It's 8, 1 is A and 8 is H. So it's Adolf Hitler, Combat Adolf Hitler. And then later you of course had National Action in the 20-teens, and lately it's reared its head again. Now I'm going to show you a little clip from 2009, when Nick Griffin, who was the leader of the British National Party at the time, was on Question Time and made a total fool of himself. And I'll show you one of the most damaging little extracts from that embarrassing performance.
I shared a platform with David Duke, who was once a leader of a Ku Klux Klan, always a totally non-violent one, incidentally. Do you...
Nick, excuse me. Don't go and talk about Ku Klux Klan.
It's a vile organization.
No. I can tell you about David Duke. We don't have time for that.
So around year 2000-ish, Nick Griffin did used to hang around with Dave Duke. He's a bad news person. He's way too extreme, way beyond the pale. He just is. You cannot hang around with someone like Dave Duke, who was in the Ku Klux Klan. He was in the American Nazi Party. He's put away his brown uniform and his white hood, and he's got the same politics as he ever had. Unapologetically, it's not saleable. It is not sellable. Now, I've used the word Nazi. What is a Nazi? Well, just to tell you what I was saying, it comes from the term National Socialist, in case you didn't know. Some people don't like the term, but some National Socialists don't like the term Nazi because it was originally a sort of abusive term by their opponents before the war. But I only use the term because it's a simple short term rather than National Socialist. So some people think you've got to be in the German party, which is called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the NSDAP, as it was called. But clearly you don't have to have been in the National Socialist German Workers' Party in the 30s to be a Nazi. Mosley's party, I mentioned Mosley. Mosley's party in Britain was called, its full name was the British Union of Fascists and National Socialists. There was a post-war party in this country called the National Socialist Movement, started in 1962, that John Tyndall was in, that I mentioned. And he had pictures of him taken. There was a thing called the World Union of National Socialists at the time that the National Socialist movement in Britain was part of, with an American guy called George Lincoln Rockwell, who had a group which was actually called the American Nazi Party, which was formed in 1960. It wasn't called the American National Socialist Party, it was called the American Nazi Party. So you don't have to be in the 1930s, you don't have to be in Germany. There are plenty of examples of Nazi parties outside of Germany and outside of the 1930s. You can be a Nazi now, that's obvious. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures relating to this. This is John Tyndall on the left when he was in the National Socialist movement with a couple of other of his colleagues. He never lived this picture down. He was later leader of the National Front, later leader of the BNP. He never lived down his flirtation with overt Nazism back in the early 60s. It lived with him for the rest of his life. Another picture here that's quite interesting. That's John Tyndall over on the right. You've got Colin Jordan, who is actually his leader, his Führer, literally his Führer in the National Socialist movement in the middle. And on the left is George, with the sunglasses and the pipe, is George Lincoln Rockwell, leader of the American Nazi Party, and with Colin Jordan, leaders of the World Union of National Socialists. Now, the term Nazi has become a smear, a swear word to use against people you don't like politically. But because that is the case, and because you're a Nazi, to anyone, particularly anyone slightly on the right, or any patriotic or area politics, doesn't mean that there aren't people who are really Nazis around. For example, just give an example of the smear. Someone went around calling Anna Soubry a Nazi, as many people will remember, and he ended up getting arrested for harassing her or something like that. She's clearly not really a Nazi just because she opposed democratic vote. You could argue the Nazis never actually opposed democratic votes in Germany, but she isn't a Nazi, but it was a sort of common smear or slur to call her a Nazi. But I would suggest to any normal person, if you appeared in pictures next to someone with a swastika, with a big smile on your face, you're going to be regarded rightly as a Nazi in this era. If you say Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiography, his political testimony, if you're going to say that Mein Kampf is your favourite book, you know, you might be regarded as a Nazi, and rightly so. If you constantly refer favourably to Hitler every time you appear anywhere, you're going to be regarded as a bit of a Nazi. I mentioned George Lincoln Rockwell a little while ago, the guy who was in charge of the American Nazi Party. If you go on a podcast praising a video that someone foolishly made about George Lincoln Rockwell, putting together all his quotes, saying how wonderful it is, then, you know, you're going to be regarded as a Nazi. If you appoint as a deputy leader of your political party a young girl who was unwise enough to go around producing loads of memes celebrating Sir Oswald Mosley, the leader, as I said before, of the British Union of Fascists and National Socialists, you're going to be regarded as a bit of a Nazi, and rightly so. If you encourage people to sign off on the internet using the term 14 and quote the 14 words in your closing words of your election, of your address at your conference, you're going to be regarded as a bit of a Nazi. Now, the 14 words, which is a big giveaway. Now, the 14 words were banned in the BNP, in the use of the 14 words were banned in the BNP for good reasons, even in the BNP back in the 2000s. I know, because I was one of the people responsible for enforcing that ban of the 14 words. The 14 words are: we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Now, that's not a bad sentiment, one might think. The trouble is, well, the English language is a wonderful thing, and you can say those same words in many different ways. You don't have to use those words. The reason those words are used is because they were coined by some guy who died in jail in America for acts of terrorism and racketeering. The group he was part of murdered a talk show host, did counterfeiting of currency, and held up vans, armoured security vans, and stole money from them for political ends. It was a group called the Order. Their other name was the Bruder Schweigen, the Silent Brotherhood. The term Bruder Schweigen, the Silent Brotherhood, which is obviously German, comes from a pictorial history book of the SS that one of them had in their house. When they were thinking of a name for their organisation, they looked at the book and said, we'll call it the Bruder Schweigen, after this book written by members of the SS, pictorial history of the SS, written by the SS to exonerate themselves from sort of crimes in the war. That the Bruder Schweigen, or the Order, were a thoroughly Nazi organisation. So quoting the 14 words coined by a member of this organisation is a direct and deliberate linkage to an out-and-out Nazi terrorist group. That is why it's so totally inappropriate to use that term in any organisation in this country, even if the sentiment behind it is okay. Use completely different words that may be 15 or 20 words or 10 words to mean the same thing, if that's what you want to do. If you want to use the 14 words, you're making yourselves Nazis, and you're being led into doing that by someone who knows the full consequences of this. Now, every country in the world has a creation myth, a myth about that gives that country its sense of identity and purpose, which is a natural thing. Often these myths are shrouded in myth, and sometimes they're shrouded in reality, myth and legend, or reality. Ours used to be things like Alfred the Great or 1066, Sir Francis Drake, but now mostly it is about us, how we stood alone during the war against Nazi Germany. That's the main unifying national myth. The Battle of Britain, the Spirit of Dunkirk, the Spitfire, D-Day, VE Day, which is coming up soon on the 8th of May. This is the thing that unites and gives our country a sense of purpose. So, how sensible is it to run an organisation like the Patriotic Alternative, because of course I'm talking about that, whose underlying ideology runs totally contrary to the unifying myth of the country that we live in? Are they doing whatever it takes to get to power by putting this massive hurdle in the way of themselves being able to talk to the people of this country? Of course they're not. It's some sort of strange, weird self-indulgence, totally divorced from real practical politics. They are not doing anything like whatever it takes to take power and obtain power in this country. They create this division between everyone else, who they call derisively civnats. So they've got their own vocabulary where they make up these words like civnat. Everyone else is a civnat, they're an ethnonat. These are ridiculous, pathetic terms. But in this country, Brexit was actually won by the most civnatty type parties you could get, like UKIP or the Brexit Party, which weren't really nationalist parties anyway. They actually achieved the referendum, which was won, and Brexit through the European election last year, forcing the Tories' hand to go through with Brexit. And Brexit was effectively, as everyone really acknowledges, an anti-immigration vote by proxy. In Europe, the strongest parties are in a European-wide group called the Identity and Democracy Party, where a number of successful moderate nationalist parties group together. For example, Salvini's party in Italy, the Lega, Marine Le Pen's party in France, the Austrian Freedom Party in Austria, obviously, the Vlaams-Belang from Belgium, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, and a load of other parties all across Europe, all very sensible, all very moderate, in the same grouping, in the same alliance you find in Britain the For Britain Party, part of the same alliance in the Identity and Democracy Party. They're making great leaps forward across Europe on a sensible, moderate platform. They're the most successful nationalist movements anywhere in Europe since the war, by far. They're doing whatever it takes. Whatever it takes is adopting that sensible platform. That's the only way to stop what is called the Great Replacement. Our replacement as Europeans is through this sensible, moderate approach. So all the successful nationalist parties in Europe have similar policies to For Britain to stop the Great Replacement from happening. The only practical policies that you can have. We in Britain, the British people are very moderate people, particularly the English people. They're very moderate, very mild sort of people. That's what's got us into this predicament in the first place. Our own innate moderation, liberalism one might call it, is within our people. So you have to approach our people in the right way for them to respond. That's obvious, blindingly obvious. They don't like, our people do not like things being addressed straight, particularly questions of race. That's why the European election was a vote for immigration by proxy. That's how they like things to be done. That's how our people like things. If you approach them the wrong way, they will not respond. That's one of the lessons that I've learnt through 40 years in this business. And by the way, I'm the person who's got the most people ever elected in councils across this country. I know how you have to appeal to our people. What is the platform of the For Britain Party to address this issue? As I said, it's very similar to that proposed by our European colleagues. It's a 5-year ban on immigration, further immigration. You have to be realistic and credible. You have to turn the tap off before you can do anything else. Trying to jump forward without even turning the tap off, it's just not credible. You've got to have something credible to put to the British people. So stopping all further immigration for 5 years, a realistic aim. We deport all foreign-born criminals and illegal immigrants. And there's lots of them. There's lots of them. Bogus asylum seekers, there's lots of them. We'd reintroduce the primacy of British culture and the teaching of our heritage, which again would make this a place of only British values, which some people would be uncomfortable with, and they would most likely leave. We would stop the Sharia practices, which would make the practice of Islam here virtually impossible. So lots of those people would probably most likely voluntarily leave. There is, by the way, already a scheme that was introduced in the Tony Blair government, in 2006, called voluntary return, where migrants can be given several £1,000s to go home. There is already a scheme of voluntary repatriation. So increasing it by a few thousand won't make a great deal of difference. There hasn't been a lot of take up of it anyway. Although in concert with our other policies, that existing policy of voluntary return would probably be more popular. Let's say we are in line with the programmes of our European colleagues, which are doing well, and working together with them is the only way to stop the Great Replacement. The Patriotic Alternative, come back to them. One of the most ridiculous things is they're clearly named after the Alternative for Deutschland, which are a moderate party in alliance with For Britain, led by a lady who their parliamentary group's a gay lady in the German Parliament. Well, one of the main things they criticise For Britain for is a gay woman who's in charge of For Britain, and they call themselves, virtually name themselves after the Alternative for Deutschland. How ludicrous. But anyway, going back to the Patriotic Alternative, they talk constantly of ethno-nationalism, a stupid phrase that was virtually invented only about 10 years ago. Ethno this, ethno that. They're totally race obsessed in their discourse. They go on about repatriation, using that word repeatedly like it's a mantra. That sort of harsh talk is just totally alien to the British people. Totally alien to them. But they seem to think a more hardline approach is what is going to win them support. It's a bit like, I remember when I went to Queen Mary College in the University of London in the East End, not long after Margaret Thatcher won her big majority in '79, and I went along. I was in another organisation at the time, the National Front, actually, if you want to know, and I went to a meeting there, a left-wing meeting. I can't remember if it was Labour Party, just out of interest, because they were discussing their defeat in the '79 general election. It was a couple of years afterwards, when Jim Callaghan, who was a very moderate, in Labour Party terms, centrist sort of Labour Party, old school Labour Prime Minister, lost to Thatcher, and their mantra was that if Labour had been true, properly hardline socialist, then the people would have responded to them. That led to Michael Foot becoming leader of the Labour Party, and in the next general election they got the lowest number of votes they've ever had, I think since probably the 20s or something, before the First World War, probably 27% in the '83 general election, which was actually less than Corbyn got in number of votes. The same sort of arguments were put forward for Corbyn, that if only he would if he put a proper socialist agenda to the British people, hardline, without compromising, then the British people would all vote for him. It's the same sort of stupid argument you get from these hardliners in the nationalist world, that the British people respond to their hardline message. They're total fantasists, total fantasists. So, I've made the point several times already. Whatever it takes to win actually means adopting sensible, moderate policies which are within the line of vision of our people, not totally out of their orbit with strident, empty talk. That sort of hard line, strident talk is actually the ultimate betrayal of our people, because it's totally hopeless. You've got no chance whatsoever of getting anywhere with it. Adopting it and coming out with it is hopeless, pathetically hopeless, and a betrayal, actually. That's why this is such an important subject to deal with. In order for us to win, going back to this, whatever it takes, we must not live up to stereotypes. There's a thing called cognitive dissonance, where to challenge people's preconceptions and their notions about you, and there's lots of notions about nationalism and our type of politics, you have to be totally different to how they expect. So that breaks down their prejudices against voting for us, for example, and supporting us. Our people are innately moderate. I've made this point already. They are innately moderate. This goes back centuries. We are a sort of a liberal people. Whether you like it or not, there is this within our people. We have to challenge liberal assumptions in a way that is sensible and makes them question their assumptions, not by living up to stereotypes. Now, in order to be able to do this, it's very valuable having another thing called a reputational shield. A reputational shield protects you from standard arguments. So if you've got a leader like, okay, go back to John Tyndall, who was the leader of the BNP. He was the opposite of a reputational shield, because he lived up to every stereotypes. He had pictures of him with swastikas and all sorts of things, and he was a stuffy white male middle-aged man. He conformed to all the sort of stereotypes. Now, I'll talk about for Britain again. Now, our leader is a fantastic reputational shield. Not only is she a brave and articulate lady, she is a woman, which provides a sort of reputational shield. She's Irish and not part of the English in-group, which is positive actually as well. She used to be in the Labour Party. She hasn't got a background in all sorts of right-wing organisations like myself, for example. Since I was a little boy, I've been in everything going. So the fact that she was in the Labour Party is a big reputational shield as well. The fact that she's gay is a big reputational shield, like the lady who's in charge of the Alternative for Deutschland in the German Parliament. It's actually a positive thing. Now, I said at the outset this was a bit of a difficult film for me to make. I've known Mark Collett for many years. We were very close political collaborators and in non-political things as well. I know him very, very well. but this is a very important business, a very important business, a vital business. And he actually deliberately chose to attack for Britain and Anne-Marie Waters several times on his various podcasts, which were ignored. Actually, I didn't particularly take any much notice of it myself. Some people would tell me, and I occasionally saw clips, but it was ignored. Then he set his trolls. They've got this stupid name called gripers or something like that. They call themselves now. They got this, as I said earlier, they got this stupid vocabulary of internet childish vocabulary they use. They're called gripers, and he set them to attack various for Britain sites, YouTube channel, Facebook pages, to provoke a reaction, which is obviously he got his way. There was a reaction, but it was a totally unprovoked attack by them on for Britain. That's how they want to gain prominence, by attacking and feeding parasitically off other organisations. I know a lot of what I've been saying is blindingly obvious, but there are a number of idealistic young people who are very obviously being led astray and effectively being groomed into something which will ruin their lives. Their leader, Mark, ruined his life by doing something very stupid when he was before he was even 20. He appeared in 2 stupid documentaries where he came out with the most ridiculous remarks. And then he compounded this later. He could have put that down as youthful folly. He then compounded this some years later, only a couple of years ago. Yes, referring to this rather unfortunate picture, this has again blighted Mark's life, and he should not be drawing other people into that world. It is totally irresponsible. So unfortunately, the horrible reality is Mark ruined his own career from any public involvement. He's a very gifted graphic designer. Mark is a good graphic designer, the best I've ever met, to be fair to the guy. He could have been done work in the background, but he wanted the limelight, and he's trying to gather around him innocent young kids, and they're only going to repeat the same mistakes that have ruined his political life and his life effectively. He should have stayed, if he didn't want to do work in the background, he should have stayed as an internet shock jock, which is what he was. That's what he was. An edgelord, I think you call them. And if he wanted to make some money, he could do that. And let's face it, this is all about earning money on those channels. No matter all the protestations to the contrary, it's all about making money. Now, the real sellouts in this game are those who propose unachievable objectives. You've got to be realistic and do whatever it takes to win, because the stakes are very, very high to stop us from destruction of our people, our culture, our civilization. It's the highest it could ever be. In this fantasy world that Patriotic Alternative are proposing, you won't even get, they're all anonymous. Who's going to stand forward and stand for election when you've got that harsh a programme? No one will step forward. It's a fantasy. The whole thing is a pathetic fantasy, and that is the biggest sellout of all. You've got to get real. You've got to get real and do whatever it takes to get power in this country. And we must not allow any of our keen, idealistic kids to have their lives ruined and blighted for the rest of their political careers by being involved in stupid, useless projects. Thank you.